Okay. Hi, my name is Dave Dodson, and I'm a professor at Stanford University at the business school, and also author of the book, The Manager's Handbook, which I'm proud of as a bestseller.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. Now I can ask you this. What courses are you teaching?
So it's at Stanford, I teach exclusively courses on entrepreneurship, and they're all in the neighborhood or the area around implementation and execution. So I've taught for many, many years a course called Managing Growing Enterprises, which deals with tactical issues that an early manager might have about hiring, firing, how to work with a partner, how to give performance reviews, how to run a meeting. So very good, very important tactical pieces about management. Also teach a course on how to go out and buy a company that you want to run. There's two paths to entrepreneurship. One is you start a company, and the other is you buy a company from someone who's retiring. So this focuses on that second branch of entrepreneurship. Also teach a course on how to have difficult conversations, whether they're with employees or customers or the press. So I teach a course on that, as well as next year I'm going to be teaching a course about the name of it is Engineering a Remarkable Life, which is making sure that you've also been as attentive to your personal life as you are to your professional life. A lot of times we're so thoughtful as we plan out our professional life, but we don't think about how that needs to integrate with our personal life.
Wow, okay, okay. That's definitely interesting. Now I can ask you this. Over the years, has technology had a major effect on, what you're presenting to the students, in terms of AI and social media, or has it kind of been consistent?
Oh, it's actually been fascinating, and I think it's really driven by the confluence of AI and COVID. Oddly enough, because what happened is that instantly, all of a sudden, all of us that were teaching had to teach online, and so we weren't really skillful at how to do things over video and how to present material and how to teach in a way where you were staring into a teeny little camera instead of looking out across the classroom, and everybody had to learn. So it was a crash course from the faculty and the teaching community. So we learned how to do that by force. And then AI has been introduced as well, which gives us a lot of interesting teaching tools. There's some challenges as well. An obvious example is that the way that you evaluate students and the way they prepare for class can potentially be different and harmful. So, for example, uh, pre-AI, if we would have a case that the students were to prepare with some study questions, you can kind of just put the case into AI in the study questions and get your basic answers. So you can probably get through class okay without embarrassing yourself, but you won't have learned anything. So that's a challenge that we have. Of course, there's the obvious challenge, which is when you're giving exams to see how well the person has comprehended the material. Those you can effectively cheat on AI. So there's some challenges as well, which we're going to have to sort through. And it's not a matter of kind of policing the students as it is a real desire to make sure that they learn the material. Because if you run into someone in the hallway as a manager, you don't get to say, well, hold on 1 second. I need to go check AI to see how I'm going to answer the question that you just asked.
Yeah, yeah, definitely, definitely. Now I could take it back a little bit. When did you develop this passion for, like entrepreneurship and management and things like that? But did you want to do this when you were a child, or did you get into it later?
I think I always wanted to be in business for myself. So my background is that I went to Stanford undergrad, got a degree there, then worked for a consulting company, McKinsey and Company, for a couple of years, went back to business school, and then began my own entrepreneurial career. So I'm not a PhD professor at Stanford. I'm what's called a lecturer, which the business school at Stanford is similar to all other business schools and principally law schools and medical schools in that they bring practitioners back to join the faculty. So what that meant was that I had a whole career as a manager or an entrepreneur before Stanford University asked me to come back and teach at the school. I think so that's quickly about my background, that I had about a 25-year career as an entrepreneur and manager. specifically to your question, yeah, I think I always knew I wanted to be in business for myself. I was very enterprising when I was in high school and middle school and throughout college. And I remember when I was getting ready to graduate from business school, and a lot of my friends were going to work at investment banks and private equity funds and consulting companies. I just could not get my heart behind that. So I told all those companies that I wasn't interested, and then went to work for a faculty member at Stanford, Irv Grossbeck, and said, I'd just like to work for you here as a case writer while I figure out what I want to do with my entrepreneurial life. And so that's how that got started.
Wow. Okay. Okay. Now I wanted to ask you about this. We was corresponding via email, and you was telling me that you was on a trip. You was in Ethiopia. If it's okay, I'd like to ask you, what was your experience like, and why were you over there?
Oh boy, I love talking about that. So about 25 years ago, I co-founded an organization which at the time was called Project Healthy Children. And that was to address micronutrient malnutrition initially in Honduras. So there's two types of hunger. One is getting calories, feeling full. And that's how we normally think about hunger. But you also need the right vitamins and minerals, and they're equally important. So you can eat, a starchy food and feel full, but you haven't given your body the nutrients that they need. And micronutrient malnutrition is, for example, the leading cause of mental retardation, leading cause of death during childbirth, leading cause of your inability to combat very common diseases such as malaria and so forth. So we got focused on how do we address that. And there's three ways that you get micronutrients or vitamins and minerals. You get it in the food you eat, which you and I had already today. We ate some fruits and some vegetables and so forth. You can take a vitamin every day. And also much of our food, except, for example, in the United States, is fortified, meaning that those vitamins and minerals are put into the food. So a common thing you might think about is vitamin D in the milk. We think about fluoride in our water. We think about vitamin C in our orange juice. Those are all vitamins and minerals that are added. That's called fortification. And in the developing world, that's really the only way that you can provide assistance for vitamins and minerals, because you can't go to someone in the countries that we work in, where you mentioned Ethiopia, and say, well, just tomorrow you need to eat more broccoli. They don't have access to it. And you certainly can't get vitamins out to everybody every single day, because vitamins basically flush through your system every day. So the first line of defense is food fortification. And what we do is we shifted from Central America to East Africa, and we work with governments and millers to fortify their food. So it's a nonprofit. The business now is called Sanku, Sanku. And we work with, excuse me for 1 second, I just got a little alert on my screen. Sorry about that.
No problem.
And we work with the millers to fortify their food. So how we do that is we manufacture the what's called the premix that goes into the flour. We invented an incredible device that allows them to fortify the food in the flour in rural mills and in the mills in East Africa. So we manufacture the premix. We sell it to them effectively at cost, because we're a nonprofit. We generally give them the equipment, and then we give them the know-how how to do it. So today, for example, about 36 million people ate food in East Africa that was fortified by our equipment and with our premix that they would not have otherwise consumed.
Wow, wow. Okay, that's truly amazing, because I travel a lot. I've been to about 70 countries, but I've been to about 20 African countries. So I've been to Africa like the last 2 years. I was in Ghana for a year, and then I was in Madagascar for like 6 months. So it's definitely a beautiful place. But coming from America, you can see, a lot of the things that we have access to, like you said, that they don't have out there, or they may have it, they may not have the money, or, whatever the case may be.
My goodness, you've been all over the place.
Yeah, I love traveling. It's a beautiful experience. Now I can ask you this: how did you go from, the business world and to going into feeding people in Africa? Was it one incident, or something you wanted to do?
Well, there was one particular incident. I was down in Honduras with my co-founder, who was on the board of an organization that sends plastic surgeons to various parts of the world to help repair cleft lips and cleft palates and burns. So all plastic surgeons. And we were on this trip in Honduras, and Hurricane Mitch hit, which at the time was the worst hurricane in 100 years. So it was really a devastating experience. And as part of that experience, we went to what they called a charity hospital. And we saw these children that were suffering from what are called neural tube defects, which is the second most common form of birth defect that is largely preventable if you have enough vitamin B9, which is one of the vitamins that's fortified. It's called folic acid, but it's vitamin B9. It's a horrendous birth defect. And we were really moved by that. So that led us to try to address this because it is so inexpensive to put vitamins and minerals in food, and it's so powerful. Now, why we shifted from Honduras to Africa was that even though we had a good idea, our original strategy wasn't correct. And so we figured out what the right strategy would be to be effective, but we kind of had to start over. And Rwanda ended up being a very logical place for us to effectively sort of repot the plant. So that's how we ended up in East Africa. And then once we understood the issues around East Africa, we stayed there. Now, the other part of your question was how that fits in with my business life. It's gone side by side. Back then I was doing well in business and I had been fortunate. So I had some time and capital to try to give back. And I did want to give back to the world because I grew up with nothing. And I looked around and really recognized that a lot of the fortune that I had fortune that had come to me, and I don't mean financial fortune, although there was some of that, but also just good fortune around mentors and good education and opportunity, was just because I happened to be, born in the right place and had good parents and had some luck along the way. So I wanted to be able to give back. But in addition, I did feel that the nonprofit world, and particularly this problem, really lends itself to good business skills and good business judgment. So, for example, when I was in Ethiopia and in Tanzania, the trip that I just came back with, which you and I were talking about, we have one pretty large facility that manufactures food grade premix. So it's equipment, it's employees. They're coming in the morning, they're manufacturing. Then they have to be put in bags and they have to be shipped out. We also make flour bags for our millers, and we have to print those. So, and then they're trucks and so forth. And so it's very much a business enterprise, and we're building a quite large facility in Ethiopia right now. So most of the things that I deal with are business issues, but they're business issues that help people be better, that help people's well-being.
Wow. Okay. That's very, very interesting. I love East Africa. Now I can ask you this: Have you ever thought about maybe doing a book or a documentary in relation to that, or no?
We hired a guy, Felix Brooks Church, just a remarkable human being, to help develop this part of our strategy. So Project Healthy Children was initially about helping governments put policies in place. The second phase is on the implementation side of it. And Felix really invented the machine or the dosifier that allows these mills to do what they do. And then he's built up the business. And I think Felix would be a fantastic subject for a documentary. But right now he's got his hands full because we're growing at about 300% a year. So as much as I think it's a fascinating story, we have too many children and moms that we need to take care of first.
Right. I definitely understand that. Now I got a chance to check out your website. I was going to ask you about talk about returning democracy to voters and how can we get there. If you could speak on that a little bit.
About I think it was 8 years ago. I might have might be off a little bit. I ran for U.S. Senate in Wyoming. And it was a little bit of kind of Mr. Smith goes to Washington. Looking back on it, I was kind of naive about how the election process and works. And we ran a good race, but we lost. Came in second place, if you will, which pays the same as coming in 32nd place. There's only one winner. But through that, even though I was disappointed with the outcome, disappointed that I lost, I did really learn about how the political process works. And the way I would describe it is, you and I could listen to talk radio and read the sports page every day and watch the games over the weekend, and we'd know a lot about the sport. But if you're on the field actually sort of taking the snap or taking hits, that's when you really understand the game. And that's effectively what I was doing. And I understood the political processes, especially around how we elect different candidates. And I came to see that it was quite broken. And part of the reason I came to see it is not only that experience, but a professor at Harvard University, Michael Porter, and his partner, Catherine Gale, had put a lot of time into looking at America's political system. And what they identified was that the issue wasn't the Democrats fighting the Republicans and the Republicans fighting the Democrats, which is actually playing into the hands of the system, but that we have a system problem. The system is broken. And how do you identify structural changes that will repair that system? Because as long as we're complaining about the other side, we're just the volleyball just gets passed from one bad side to the other. And I don't mean the Republicans are bad or the Democrats are bad. I'm saying that Washington and especially the legislative branch is ineffective. I have identified really two fixes, which I think is what you're referring to. One are term limits for the Senate and for the House, and the second is gerrymandering. And both of those are fixed through a constitutional amendment. And there's, if you look back over all the constitutional amendments that we've had in the United States, by far and away, the most common reason why we went in and we amend the Constitution was to fix issues in our election process. So for example, 18-year-olds can vote, constitutional amendment. Second one is that both you and I get to vote. That wasn't always the case, as you know. Constitutional amendment. Letting women vote. That was a constitutional amendment. Having the president and the vice president run on the same ticket. That was a constitutional amendment. And so it goes. So we've been working on our elections process for quite some time, but we stopped doing that about 50 years ago. And we kind of forgot that was important. And part of the reason was that the system had fallen into this groove where it served the legislative as it served them as individuals, and they didn't want to tinker with it. Now, here's what's interesting: is that if you were listening to me right now, you would say, "Oh boy, you could never have a constitutional amendment because Congress will never go along with term limits, or Congress would never go along with ending gerrymandering," even though we know from a combination of just reading the data, polling data, and actually common sense that nearly all Americans believe that would prefer to have that system. So what's interesting is that the founders of the Constitution, the original authors of the Constitution, already thought of this, and they realized that it was possible that there could be that important changes to the Constitution would be needed that would not be in the interests of congressmen. And so the second way you change the Constitution is you do it at the state level, and it completely bypasses the Congress, which was done on purpose. We've never done it that way because we've never needed to do it. And that's what's necessary. And it's a statewide effort. And in my opinion, we have 50 states. Once you get about 15 states to effectively sign this petition, then it becomes out of the hands of the Congress and it comes back in our hands. And until we're willing to do that, we're not going to change the system. Now, I'll give you an example, and this has nothing to do with how you voted or how you feel about policy. But this morning, for example, I saw that Senator Tillis is not going to run for re-election because he's opposing the current spending bill that's working its way through the Senate as we speak. And the president, Donald Trump, said, if you oppose it, I'm going to find someone to primary you. And so Tillis made an interesting decision. He said, you know what, I'm going to vote the way I think I should vote, and I'll just not run again. Now, that is a perfect example of why term limits matter. He's decided not to vote, he's decided not to run for re-election, and so he is free to vote on the Senate floor the way he feels fit. Whether you agree with his voting or not doesn't make any difference. The important thing is that now he's free to vote the way he sees fit. That's why you need term limits in Congress, just like we have term limits in almost every governor's office, we have term limits in the president, is so that a vast majority of the senators say, you know what, I'm not susceptible to threats. I don't care whether I get reelected or not. I'm going to do the job that I was sent here to do.
Okay, okay. Now I can ask you because politics is kind of touchy. Have you received a lot of pushback for your views and the work that you're doing in regards to that?
No, I mean, because if you okay, so term limits are pretty easy to get your arms around. You're either for them or not. Most people are for them, and we have them in so many other parts of our political system. And I've heard arguments about, well, what about the experience? Well, just look around, okay? It's obviously not working. And we don't feel that way with the President of the United States, and we don't feel that way with most governors. So why would we change that standard? But we'll let everybody make their own decision on term limits. I think I could make a pretty strong case for it. Gerrymandering is a little bit different. Gerrymandering to me is a voting rights issue initially. Because what gerrymandering is doing is the original intent for the House of Representatives was that a representative was supposed to represent what's called a community of interest, which means exactly what you and I would think. It's like a group of people that are all kind of like-minded. We live in the same area. We go to the same shopping center, and so we're a community of interest. And we need someone to go to Washington and represent us. With gerrymandering, what you say is, no, I want to maximize the chances that this particular person gets reelected. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to fabricate a zone where I'm going to deliberately make some people's votes more powerful and other people's votes not powerful. So here would be a quite simple example. Let's say you have two side-by-side congressional districts, and one is a Republican district and the other is a Democratic district. By the way, both parties gerrymander freely. And let's say in the Republican district, and let's say I'm the Republican senator, Republican congressman, and that district is 60% Republican and 40% Democratic. So I'm clobbering it. My district next door is actually 55% Democrat, 45% Republican. So what gerrymandering does is we say, you know what, I'm going to take some of those extra Republican votes that I don't need, and I'm going to shift the district so that it applies to this other person's district. So what I've done is I've created two Republican districts. Again, this is not partisan. I could have substituted the name for Democrat. I've created two Republican districts simply by taking some people's votes and rendering them more valuable than others. Or in the case of the other district, I took people's votes and I made them not valuable. So, for example, it even gets more sinister. You could have a situation where I would take your vote, for example, where your vote really matters in that district, and I take your vote and I move it over into another district where your vote doesn't matter anymore based on the demographics of that district. That's no different than if I took your vote and I took your ballot and I dropped it in the trash. All right, so it's a voting rights issue. The practical implication, though, is that when you had communities of interest, that congressperson who was running for re-election or their challengers had to appeal to both sides, and they had to hang out in the middle because they needed, if I'm a Republican, I need a few Democratic votes to win, or vice versa. When you gerrymander the district to make it safe, you don't need to appeal to the other people. You don't need to appeal to the middle because you've ensured that you're going to win that district. And that's why we've seen this like strong shift of people to the far right and to the far left while they ignore the other side. The result is that you have exactly what happens in Congress right now, which is that everybody votes party line. And it's also rendered most congressmen completely like robots, both in the House and the Senate. They're told by their leadership who to vote for. It used to be that they said, look, I'm going to listen to what my party says, and I'm going to listen to the leadership. But in the end, I get to vote how I want to vote. And by the way, I have to do that because I've got people in my district who I need to appeal to. So I hang out around the middle and I vote my conscience. Under gerrymandering, you don't. And if you look at voting patterns, there's a really interesting graphic that has a bunch of red dots and a bunch of blue dots. And what you would see, let's say 50 years ago, is an overlap of those dots. So they kind of overlap like this, meaning that most of the time a blue dot is, or a Democrat is going to vote with the other Democrats, but not always. They did, the term crossed party lines, and generally about 20% would cross party lines. And those two dots have just increasingly gone like this to where they're completely separate. And we've normalized, unfortunately, the idea that if you have a 51-49 Senate, that most of the votes are going to be 59-49, because the senators just are told vote this way and they vote this way. So that's what you get from gerrymandering, and you get that from term limits. If you fix those two things, then you empower each individual senator and congressman, and then you empower the legislative branch. And right now, nobody could make the argument that the legislative branch is anything more than they salute to whoever's their party leader right now and vote the way they're told. It's a little bit of a mouthful, but it is something I care a lot about, especially as we've observed the political system over the last 15 years.
Definitely. I appreciate you taking out the time to break that down. Now, I was going to ask you, we kind of got off to a late start. I had maybe like one or two more questions. Did you have another appointment or? Okay. I definitely wanted to ask you about the manager's handbook. What inspired that, and what is it about?
So I'm really proud of the manager's handbook, and I'm happy with that. It's doing well. What I wanted to do is I wanted to take the concepts around how to get things done and execution and put them into basically a how-to format. So the name, working with the publisher, was a little bit controversial. The manager's handbook, they weren't sure about the term handbook. But I said, no, I don't want this as a book to read. I want it as a book that people would use. And those of us who have, read business books, a lot of times you'll read the business book and you'll get inspired. Maybe it's about a particular person or a particular concept. You're all fired up and inspired, and then you go back to doing the same thing that you were doing before. This book is the opposite of this. This book breaks it down and says there are 5 principal skills that differentiate people who are good at getting things done with people who are not so good at getting things done. And within each of those 5 skills, there's 22 sub-skills. So break it down. The first one is the ability to put together a team. Well, if I said to you, hey, getting the right people on board is important, you would nod, but then you would leave this podcast or my classroom and say, but like, how do you do that? Well, you do it by being good at hiring. And you do that by being good at onboarding, and you do that by being good at giving feedback, and by letting people go, and doing exit interviews, and doing 360 reviews. So there's these 5 sub-skills, and if you do all those things right, then you will build a team. And each one of those sub-skills is quite straightforward. Here is how you give feedback. It's formulaic, and most things about day-to-day management are formulaic. So this sort of lays out the formula. Because what I really want to do is I want to have a book that as I said, that people use, but that really changed behavior. And that's the feedback that I've gotten from the book all along, is people say, I manage differently and I manage better because of it. Everybody, of course, knows Amazon, the company, and people think, wow, Jeff Bezos, he was a visionary and, a tech guy. No. The plumbing behind Amazon was invented by other people. And the idea of selling online was actually invented in Leeds, England, many, many years before, as a way to help elderly people buy their groceries online. And Amazon wasn't even the first company to sell books online. And by the way, the year that Amazon came out, so did Target and Sears in terms of selling online. No, Target and Kmart, sorry. And then right after that, Barnes & Noble and Borders and Walden Books started selling online. So Amazon was completely surrounded by competitors trying to do exactly the same thing. What differentiated Amazon was that they were better at day-to-day execution. It doesn't sound glamorous, but it's the reason why, Jeff Bezos was, at one point the richest person in the world. And now he's getting married. I think to probably the most expensive wedding in the world.
Wow, wow. Okay. Now, how long did it take you to work on this?
30 years is the quick answer, because it's really the summation of all my, I mean, definitely some of my own experience, but my observations of other leaders. But the real, where I sat down and said, I'm going to write a book, probably took about 18 months or so, maybe more like 2 years, because it wasn't, oh, it's all in my head and now I need to get it on paper, or I want to write about myself. It was a recognition of the importance of implementation and execution, and then going out and observing all of these other very effective leaders and looking at what they do and then organizing it in the way that the book is organized. So there was a fair amount of research that came about as a result of the book. It definitely is not, hey, manage companies like David Dodson managed his companies. The book is how I wish I'd managed companies. It's me curating the best practices of the very best managers out there and putting it in a format, an everyday format that you or I can follow.
Okay, okay. Well, yeah, I definitely appreciate you taking time to stop by on the podcast. I really appreciate the work that you have done, but I look forward to the work that you have coming in the future. Are you working on any new projects or?
Right now, I'm really working hard at trying to bring good quality business education to community colleges. I think it's an underserved part of our education system, and so that's a current passion of mine. And then, of course, what we talked about earlier about food fortification.
Okay, okay. Well, thank you again. It's been a phenomenal episode. You share so much information. I'm still processing a lot of it, and I'm sure the viewers is as well. And I'll make the edits, and then I'll send you the link.
Terrific. I enjoyed it. Have a good rest of your day.
Likewise. Yep. Take care and be safe out there.
Okay. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye-bye.